do game developers actually hate the Xbox Series S? Because this recent interview by Digital Foundry is starting to seem like it, but I want to talk about that. What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here. Hi, hope you're having a great day. If you could like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Now let's just start things off with the basic fact that, for the most part, the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 have been almost identical. Yeah, true, on some games the graphics are a little bit better or the frame rate is a little bit better on this or that, but I do feel like, for the most part, both of these systems are incredibly great. I love their exclusives, I love Game Pass, and especially I love the big crazy storylines that Sony has been crafting on this latest generation. But there have been a series of little tidbits that have been coming out that the problem with current day design isn't the Series X or the PlayStation 5, it's the Series S, the slightly scaled down version of a cheaper game console that Microsoft is putting out. There's been these there's been these articles that have been popping up, like here's one over on NerdStash, that apparently in private, lots of game developers are annoyed because if you want to put a game out on anything right now, if you want to put out any game on Microsoft's consoles, it has to be playable on both. Now, let's be clear, the Xbox Series S is objectively weaker. It's just not as strong as the PlayStation 5 or even the Series X. So because of it, it means that you have to actually make a separate downgraded version of your own game in order to sell it on Microsoft's systems. And a lot of people have started to basically say, man, this sucks. Especially if you are a tinier indie studio, that literally means more development costs to make your game even work. But part of the reason this is just back in headlines is because recently we had the reveal of Baldur's Gate 3. This was at the State of Play last week, and a lot of people were actually very impressed by it. I've played Baldur's Gate 3. There's like an early access version of it on PC. It's fantastic. Very, very goofy. Very, very fun. Well, they've announced it's coming to the PlayStation 5. And now the developers over at Larian are saying, okay, let's be clear. We are making it for the Xbox. We haven't announced an Xbox release date because we've run into technical issues. Now, scrolling down to their actual specific statement, these are Larian's words right here, and they said, there's no platform exclusivity, we didn't sign any contract with Sony, but we've been unable to get split-screen co-op to work on both the Xbox Series X and the Series S, which is required for you to ship your game. Apparently, inside of Microsoft, when you're about to put out a game, they have a very, very specific contract that says the game must run, the game must not be glitchy, the game must not be broken, obviously, but it has to have the exact same gameplay experience on the Xbox Series S and the Xbox Series X. Both consoles. You can't have split-screen co-op in one and not the other. Well, the reason this has come up is because now Digital Foundry has decided to chime in. I fully trust Digital Foundry. They do tech deep dives way beyond my pay grade. That's why they have millions of subscribers and I have like 200,000. But these dudes have been talking about the implications of why there is this weird complaining about Xbox Series S from developers. Now, I want to listen to them here for like 30 seconds. So here we go.
So I think it's actually a technical requirement laid out by the platform holder, in this case Microsoft. Both Sony and Microsoft have a whole range of technical requirements in order for your machine, in order for your game to be compliant with their hardware. So yeah, typically both Microsoft and Sony, when the enhanced consoles came along, there was a directive that yes, you could have different visual features on both machines, but the gameplay features, there had to be parity between those two machines. One could not have an advantage over the other in that regard. So yeah, on Series S versus Series X,
Basically, what he's talking about is that when we first saw, obviously, the PlayStation 4 Pro, there's been rumors of like a Nintendo Switch Pro and stuff. Apparently, inside these console makers, their rule is, okay, you can make better graphics, but we can't exactly sell a gameplay trailer for your game like on the box if it's going to have different features depending on the different hardware. Now, here's a bit that they say a tiny bit later on. Now, this has been clipped by Red Dragon. Red Dragon, bit of a guy. He says right here he likes to troll people a lot, but he did find this interesting clip. Now, I want to listen to it. It's a minute long. We're just going to listen to like another couple seconds of it, but they start to talk about the fact that what if we begin to see a laxing of the rules? What if we start to see maybe some Xbox Series X games that perhaps don't have features of the Series S? Maybe they start to actually be allowed to drop certain limitations that exist with the Series S. But here we go.
Ship Baldur's Gate 3 without this feature, then suddenly there's going to be a whole bunch of developers who might be struggling with Series S features going to Microsoft and saying, hey, if you've let Baldur's Gate go through without split screen, can you let us ship this game without this feature or that feature?
Absolutely agreed. It's like the thin end of a wedge, isn't it? Like
So basically what they're saying is that if somehow Larian manages to go to Microsoft and say, hey, we just can't get it to work. It's just not going to be possible, or it's going to take so many years of development that perhaps it will end up hurting sales, which means even for Microsoft getting their cut, that's going to be less money. If they get permission to cut split screen co-op, maybe other developers will start to come to them and say, hey, can we get a special exception for our Series S game? Can we cut those same corners? And what's interesting is that we are starting to see the fact that it does seem like Microsoft in the past has gotten more lax even with their own rules. Now, he brings up a good example here in a sec.
I mean, we've seen it before. I mean, not off the top of my head, we had, remember the really arbitrary, in the 360 days, they said you could only make a downloadable game for this size. I think Castlevania had to be within 100 megabytes, and then one broke, and then several others were allowed to break over the course of the generation. So I think it's very early in this generation for them to make an exception, but they're going to have to. You're right, this is like...
So this was an interesting thing way back on the Xbox Live days, the early Xbox 360 era. We were seeing the first all-digital games. Xbox Live was a huge pioneer for indie games like Castle Crashers. A lot of weird, cool, tiny AA games finally got a big spotlight on them. And apparently, Microsoft had a rule where it had to be tiny enough because, honestly, storage back then was so incredibly limited and so expensive. So they were saying, okay, you can't release. Like back then, the entire hard drive was 5 gigs. So they couldn't release a 1 gig indie game because, I mean, even if people did install it, they're probably not going to buy anything else. But over time, they got more lax about those 100 megabyte rules. And I think it made, obviously, Xbox Live become a lot more popular in the process. I think I have seen also a lot of pushback from some developers saying that apparently the Series S isn't that tough. Apparently they've said it is different, it is more limited in power, but they have basically said, okay, it is annoyance, it is extra work, but it's still very doable. The Series S is still a strong machine. I'm not going to act like this thing is like 10 years out of date. This thing is just a step down from the beefy boy of the Series X. But I am kind of curious from my standpoint, just as a random gamer who buys a lot of different games, how many studios are making that decision in secret right now, saying, you know what, I'll take the PlayStation 5 as a platform, not because it just sold more. Like, obviously, there's a way more PlayStation 5s that have been sold, so you have a bigger group to buy your game. But additionally, it is cheaper since you're only making stuff for one console. I am curious how many console exclusives from third parties are straight up because it's cheaper to put your game there. I don't know. These are just some off-the-cuff thoughts. What do you think about this? Are you at all eating up these rumors of a low-cost problem with the PlayStation 5 versus Xbox Series S versus the Series X? Does this seem like an actual issue, or is this just whiny game developers? Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a big old thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already, and please keep dreaming. Oh man, I've been playing so much delicious Castlevania Dead Cells. I want to make a review of it, but honestly, I'm really bad at Dead Cells. I recorded a bunch of gameplay, and I'm just getting my face stomped out of the dirt. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.